Welcome to a course in documentary studies. In this initial lecture, I want to provide you with an overview of this unique type of research. It's research, yes. Each documentary project is a kind of research project, a way of finding out how we are with each other, and in some cases, a way of finding out how we may improve the lives of others. So at the very beginning, you should understand that there are two major goals in this course: to understand how the documentary tradition works, and to design and complete your own documentary project. This indeed is in tall order, so let's get started. I want to provide you in the beginning with some definitions of documentary work. I want to talk a little bit about the tradition, the tensions involved in this kind of work, and the documentary impulse. I want to talk some about the methods of documentary studies. Those who undertake this kind of work use a kind of qualitative research, and I want to link the documentary tradition with that. I also want to talk about some of the tools of documentary studies: writing, photography, tape recording, film, and now use of the World Wide Web here. I want to talk to you some about the models of those who have worked in this tradition before. And I want to, at the very beginning, give you not only the materials we've selected in the course, but some of the materials beyond the course, materials you might want to make yourself familiar with early on. And these are kinds of case studies, kinds of in-depth work that allow you to generate your own hypotheses, your own topics, your own variables in your own documentary studies. I want to talk to you a little bit about the process of how this works, and I want to turn to some ideas of the way that philosophy of science tells us that research works, with phases of discovery and justification and acceptability. I wanted to close this lecture and chat with you a little bit about the nature of this as a seminar, and I want to talk to you about your role in the course, and I'll end with a few suggestions to help you get started. Let's begin then with some initial definitions about documentary studies. Let's talk about the definition of it, the tradition, some information there, the tensions that we find in documentary work, and finally, what is the documentary impulse in the first place. Our goal here in this beginning part of the course, and indeed throughout the course, will be the work of Robert Coles. Who is Robert Coles? Coles is at present a professor of psychiatry and medical humanities at Harvard. He's won the Medal of Freedom from President Clinton. He's a MacArthur Foundation Award winner from 1981, and from his Children of Crisis series, he won a Pulitzer Prize. I think that Coles is one of the foremost social thinkers of our time, and I think that he, late in his career, has begun to embrace the idea of documentary studies as a way to more precisely render, as we said earlier, the way we are with each other. Coles begins with asking us to look at the documentary tradition by defining it. He looks at it sort of etymologically, which is the study of the principle of words and the origin of words, and he asks us to begin to try to define the term itself. Let me turn then to his work, Documentary Studies, to get us started there. He writes, "The noun document goes back centuries in time. It is derived from the Latin docere, to teach, and was originally, of course, used to describe something that offered clues or better proof, a piece of paper with words that attested evidence. In our time, a photograph or a recording or a film have also qualified as documents. In the early 18th century, the word document became more active, a verb whose meaning conveyed the act of furnishing such evidence, and eventually, as with the noun, the range of such activity expanded. First one documented with words on paper, later one documented with photographs and a film crew. Interestingly, the verb would get used this way too, to construct, to produce as a movie or novel, with authentic situations or events, and to portray realistically. Here, the creative or imagined life is tempered by words such as authentic or realistically, which nonetheless potentially subjective or elusive. A distance has been traveled from the documenting that has to do with words on paper, court records, schools, reports, letters, journals, diaries, offered as proof that something happened in, say, a judge's chamber or a classroom. In the early 19th century, the adjective documentary emerged, a description of evidence naturally, but also as relating to or employing documentation in literature or art, again an encounter of the factual or objective with the imaginative. In this century, the noun documentary arrived, telling of a product, the documentary presentation of a film or novel. The one who did such work got a name in the 1940s, well, two names, documentarian and documentarist. Just before those two words entered the language, as if in anticipation of them, documentarist came into use, a specialist in documentation, a person who furthered the tradition of old-fashioned documenting, as indicated by the word documentation, itself a bequest of the late 19th century, and meant to refer to historical verification and substantiation. I think that this kind of work, sort of a definition derived from the Oxford English Dictionary, helps us to generate some more precise thoughts about the origin of documentary studies and what it is that it helps us to realize about this kind of research. As well, the tradition, the pursuit of what James A.G. called human actuality, will help us as well. Where do we begin? Who began documentary studies? Well, in this course, I'm certainly looking at Thoreau, documenting his experiences on living deliberately at Walden, both his own psychological experiences as well as sort of an emblematic view of what the world was in 19th century America. Perhaps we could jump forward a little bit in time to Matthew Brady's photographic views of war, the Civil War in this case in 1862, or moving farther a little bit to Jacob Riis's How the Other Half Lives in 1890. We could look at Stieglitz's photographs of New York City made during the last decade of his career from 1927 to 1937. We could look at Lewis Hine, who in 1908 and after traveled extensively photographing children in mines, factories, canneries, textile mills, street trades, assorted agricultural industries. Clearly his work had impact. His photographs alerted the public to the fact that child labor deprived children of childhood and health and education, a chance for a future. His work was a driving force behind changing public attitudes. He was instrumental in the fight for stricter child labor laws. We could look at Dorothea Lange and Paul Taylor's American Exodus. We could look, as we will in this course, at James A.G. and Walker Evans' Let Us Now Praise Famous Men in 1939, along with Lange and Taylor's American Exodus. We could also look at film. Perhaps more Americans than any other get their idea about history from Ken Burns, his work on the Civil War, and his documentary work on jazz, or major ways that we begin to see that film allows us to view history very precisely, very accurately by the use of images, by the use of sounds, in the case of jazz especially. Or we might look at Frederick Marx's work, as we will in this course, of Hoop Dreams. We might also look on the World Wide Web. The documentary project at the Illinois Institute of Technology entitled Voices of the Holocaust is certainly a very important kind of work that leads us to look very carefully at the way that transcripts, specifically in this case tapes transcripts, might tell us more about Holocaust survivors. What about the tensions that we find in documentary work? Quite frequently, we assume that this sort of study goes off flawless and hitchless and that there are no complexities involved, and that's very, very far from true. Coles tells us, remember we're looking at Coles as our guide in this project, that two particular conversations gave him pause, one with Eric Erickson and one with a woman named Mrs. Bridges, who was Ruby Bridges' father. Who is Eric Erickson to begin with? Well, Coles wrote a book on Eric Erickson, I believe it was in 1970, called Eric H. Erickson, The Growth of His Work. Coles was Erickson's student. Erickson is best known for his 8 stages of psychosocial development and for the idea of identity crisis. He's perhaps been called the father of psychosocial development and an architect of identity. Coles recalls a conversation with Erickson, and it's a particularly interesting one because what Coles tries to get at is this idea of tension. He's talking to Erikson about the idea of, trying to find out what documentary studies means in the first place. And Coles writes, he says, quote, "I remember that way that Erikson had of saying it. It will keep going back to those words and the way that Erikson regarded them as helpful, as greatly clarifying a word Erik loved to use. The documentary tradition as continually developing record that is made in so many ways, with different voices and visions, intents and concerns, with each contributor, finally, needing to meet a personal test, the hurdle of you, the would-be narrator, trying to ascertain what you truly believe is, though needing to do so with an awareness of the confines of your particular capability, that is, your wants and wants, your various limits, and two, the limits imposed on you by the world around you, the time allotted you, and the historical time fate has given you for your life to unfold." The quote ends there. It's particularly valuable to us to think about that quote, the idea of the wants and wants, what it is that you have to achieve to satisfy your own particular self-governing mechanism of what it is that allows you to say, this is true, this is what I have documented, this is a realistic, not a rig, but a realistic and factual portrayal of what's here. So your own tensions, Erik Erikson helps us to think about that with Coles. The second is a statement that comes from Ruby Bridges' mother, Mrs. Bridges. Coles' early work dealt with children under conditions of crisis, and in New Orleans in the 1960s, Ruby had been interviewed by Coles in a number of ways. Coles had used drawings to help us understand more about the tensions that Ruby Bridges was going through as she began the process of breaking the segregation barrier in the South, as she showed up day and day in front of angry mobs who did not want the little black girl in front of a white school. Ruby Bridges' mother's talking to Coles, and Coles recalls that they're sitting over coffee and cake, and Mrs. Bridges is talking about the future, that of her child and his family, and Coles writes this: "At a certain point, however, I began to realize that she, Mrs. Bridges, was also talking about a particular human involvement which she and her daughter and her husband and other children had been enjoying coming to an end. 'We'll be missing you,' she said. 'We've got so used to you coming here that we forgot you're only going to be with us so long, and then you'll be on your way. Ruby told me she was sure you'd stay here in New Orleans and that we'd see you the way we have because you're our friend. And that's what I told her. He is their friend, but he's got his work to do, and it's all over. So he won't be visiting us like in the past. Maybe now and then.'" The quote ends there. And Coles recalls that, he was surprised at Mrs. Bridges' directness here. But it's true that we should think about our responsibility toward the people we interview, the people we work with as we pursue this kind of research. What are our responsibilities towards those people after we leave them, and our responsibilities toward those people as we're with them? So I think Coles uses Erik Erikson and Mrs. Bridges' conversations with both of them to get us to think more deeply about the tensions about getting it right and our responsibilities towards others. And also the impulse in documentary studies. Coles reminds us very frequently in his own work about children and what it is that children want to do in documentary studies. And children, of course, want to know. They want to know more deeply. They want to know more profoundly, more exactly. And Coles asks us to think about the impulse of children in documenting their world around us. He uses one particular incident of a child who's telling about a visit to grandmother, and he turns to the child turns to the class and says, he wants the class to feel as if they were grandmother's guest. And that's sort of getting the feeling as if you were there participating in the particular instance, in the immediacy of an event, is part of what documentary studies compels us to do. Let's look a little more carefully at this point then at the methods of documentary work as we proceed forward, and what those methods are. I'm going to refer back to some work by Rosnow and Rosenthal in a book called Beginning Behavioral Research, as well as some joint, what might be called technical standards for educational and psychological testing. These works are available for you in your own research. But these are some core principles about methods. Let's begin with the idea of a construct. The construct is a mental model. It's a theoretical concept that's formed to serve as a casual or descriptive explanation. Frequently, you'll be asking yourself, what is the construct of the thing I am trying to study? For example, Walker Evans, James Agee were trying to study impoverished conditions at a certain part of our country during a certain historic period. Studs Terkel, in Working, book we're not looking at here, but a very important book, tries to determine what it is that people do when they go to work every day. What are their concerns? What are their actions, their behaviors as they go? So frequently, to begin with, you'll ask, what's the particular kind of thing you want to look at the beginning? What's the construct? As well, what are the variables in the study? What is the event that is being observed? Now, frequently, this is complex, so let's spend a moment on this. We ask in this course that you look at the event to be observed in terms of cause and effect. In our particular case, in terms of a dependent or outcome variable and an independent variable. The dependent or the outcome variable is that in which the researcher is interested. It is as it were the effect. The independent variable are the causes, the particular things that lead to changes in the dependent variable. So in our particular case, we might talk, for example, of conditions in which the independent variable is turned or examined, or if you want to look at it sort of metaphorically, manipulated. In different sorts of circumstances, different sorts of events change, and that changes the outcome. And I think that looking at the nuances of the relationship between variables, between causes and effects, will be helpful in this course. As well, I want us to look at methods in this course of design of validity, reliability, and time. Validity, and I'm oversimplifying this at this point, but there'll be more on this later. Ask simply, does a study capture what it is supposed to capture? Is it a valid study? And reliability, does a study capture information that is consistent, stable, and dependable? So it is, I think, a mark of both validity and reliability that in 1939, Dorothea Lange and James Agee were both able to document a sort of impoverishment in the United States, independently of each other, achieving a certain sort of validity in what they saw out there and reliability of two independent observers. And also I want you to think about the idea of time. What can realistically be accomplished in your studies in a set time frame? You will only have a limited amount of time, not weeks, not more than weeks literally, but certainly not years to undertake a particular kind of study. So what can reasonably and economically be done in a limited time frame? I think it's also not only useful to talk about, sort of strategies, but also to talk about tools, ways of accomplishing this particular kind of study. Will you be using writing, a sort of journal or diary, to capture what happens over an extended period of time? Will you be looking at photography? Will your model, for example, be Walker Evans? Will you be looking at tape recordings, going out into the field, asking certain sorts of questions, perhaps performing structured or semi-structured interviews with a tape recorder? Will you be looking at film, in the same way perhaps that Marx does it in Hoop Dreams, particular kind of clips to capture people in movement and in action over time? Or will you be particularly looking at the World Wide Web? I spoke before of the Illinois Institute of Technology project on the Holocaust, and there are other sites to be examined as well. But I think that the computer as tool allows us a new way of capturing documentary information. What are our models? What are we looking at in this particular course? Well, as I said before, we'll certainly begin with Henry David Thoreau. We won't be looking at resistance to civil government here, but we will be looking at Walden, his diary extended over time, reflected back in his journals, and then recaptured again at a later date. More about that later. In which he captured, I think, as I said before, not only his own psychology, but a particular sort of individualism that was much needed in America during that period. James Agee and Walker Evans, let us now praise famous men, we've spoken about just before. But that will allow us to see how both photography and words are used to capture a particular project at a particular time. Bruno Latour and Stephen Woolgore captured the way that scientists work in laboratory life, the construction of scientific facts, and anthropological study. Hoop Dreams, and we'll see some excerpts from that later in the course, will allow us to see how sports evolve and sort of work to help individuals regain and reify their own consciousness and their place in the world. Studs Terkel uses interviews in Will the Circle Be Unbroken? Reflections on Death, Rebirth, and Hunger for Faith. And the World Bank has sponsored a study, Voices of the Poor Crying Out for Change, in 3 volumes. We'll take a look precisely at the second one here, a series of qualitative structured interviews. And Tom Rankin, our editor of Local Heroes Changing America, part of a massive documentary project run under the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University. What's the process of this kind of work? Well, we might begin by thinking, again, we're looking at some information here from Rosnow and Rosenthal of 3 kinds of steps. The first you're involved at in this very early stage of the course, and that's the initial thinking stage. This is where you begin to develop a working hypothesis, a conjecture of what it is you might want to study. It's where you begin on looking at generating perhaps some of the original constructs and some of the original relationships between variable constructions, and you also begin to get an idea of the timeline. Very frequently also during this discovery stage, it's good to look at case studies, which is why we're looking at these intensive cases, as we talked about a minute ago, all the way from Walden, all the way through Local Heroes, so that we can get an idea of how other documentary studies work. The justification phase, the second part, is the literature search. Yes, you'll be asked to work up your particular proposal for research by looking at what others have done in this particular field before you. Certainly the World Wide Web provides some justification of the way to do this, but there's no substitute for a library and what a library can actually do. Finally, we have the acceptability stage, the end result of research, and where we have an idea that we have a kind of correspondence between what it is that we were trying to find out all along and what is actually going to exist in our own particular study, so that we realize that what we've captured here, I think, is something that at the end of it, something that we've captured here is something that is quite valid, quite useful for ourselves and for others as well. It's also necessary to think about this as a kind of seminar. What's a capstone experience? I think that that's something that allows you at the end of a particular part in your educational career to bring everything together, a sort of summative experience that allows you to take your work, for example, in this case in the humanities and social sciences, and stand at the end of your career at a very particular kind of project and look back at it and bring many, many kinds of things together, and we'll sort of attempt to do that in the documentary study that'll be involved in this course. I also think that in this seminar there should be an attraction to the subject at hand, or else why would you be here in the first place? That this work is going to be compelling and it's going to be interesting work. The idea of enthusiasm, I think, is going to be important here as well, that there's something that's going to make you drive forward in this, that's going to be compelling to what you're doing. As well, I think the idea of open-mindedness here is going to be important as well. I'll ask you to raise incessant questions that are both broad and narrow concerning your experiences with what it is that you're doing here. I think that dedication is an important part of what we're dealing with here, something that's not undertaken casually, but something that's undertaken in a very focused way to pull you forward into your material and to make sure that you get it right, to make sure that it's done well. I think that the idea of good sense is important here too. The idea that no matter what's done here, that over a particular period of time, that you'll be able to see what you're doing is something that is very sensible. I think all the things that we say in the world that's going to be possible about you to do here that is academic, those things are academic in origin, certainly wouldn't substitute for the idea of good common sense, being able to accomplish the project, for example, in a particular period of time. Role-taking ability, I think will also be crucial here. The ability, as it were, to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to look at a particular situation the way that individual looks at the situation. To continue, I'm looking for principled inventiveness on your part. I'm looking for clever ways for you to get at information, and I'm looking for you to get at that information in a way that is ethical and responsible to those people whose circumstances you will document. I'm looking for you to have, perhaps not at the beginning, but as you go along, a building sense of confidence in what it is that you're doing here, a building sense that you'll be able to look very, very meaningfully and very surely at what it is you're doing, that it's not a scaffolded-up project or not a scaffolded-up discussion of other people's documentary work, but something that is authentic. I'm depending on you being able to write well. The ability to write lucidly and clearly in this course is going to be more important than perhaps in any other course that you've taken. I think that you'll need to be able to tolerate rejection and to persevere in this. Some of your ideas may go awry. Some of them may be shaky ideas. Some of them may not be executable in a particular time period. And I'll tell you that as we go along and ask you to refine or revise those ideas. I'll ask you to be more consistent or continually consistent and care about the details here. And this includes everything from the exactness of your writing to the meticulousness of your research as you work up your projects, and all the way to the way that, for example, you would document your sources using particular documentary systems in here. Care and consistency about the details. And of course the idea of integrity and intellectual honesty in what you're doing, that what you're doing is important, not to me, but to you as well. And I suppose most importantly, the phrase that will come up again in your own mind is the importance of getting it right, the importance of really trying your very best to capture and to document a particular situation in a particular time. How about getting started? Well, to begin, I think you should survey the materials that we have in this course. The syllabus will be crucial to you here. I would say you should have in front of you, as soon as the course starts, all the books in hand, and to simply review those quickly to get a good idea of what's in each of those, and then get into each of the books more deeply as we go through the course. I want you to begin to think about the study design, to think about the idea of the construct, what it is you're studying, to think about constructing the variables, to try to decide how it is that what you're doing will be a valid study, and how you will be able to survive the test of reliability, and also what you might be able to do in a particular time. So I want you to think about that, and I want you to think very early on about those ideas of tools as well. Will you use writing? Will you use tape recordings, photography? Will you use film? Or you try to design a website, for example, in which you actually document what it is that you're trying to do. So why undertake this work at all? Well, I think that we might be well to return to Cole's here at the end. I think that we do it for two reasons. We do it because we want to find out how we are with each other, and in some case, we want to try to rectify the wrongs that there are in this world. Coles writes, "Why do such work, documentary work, in our adult lives? Why avail ourselves of the documentary impulse? No question, as indicated, we do so out of a natural curiosity, even as the reader or viewer joins us for similar reason. Yet many documentarians have seen wrongs in this world and have wanted to change it. Even as there is a call to service in many of us, our way of connecting with others, of trying to be of help to them, and thereby, of course, helping others, there is a need for us to stop and think about what we are doing as we work at that service, as we tutor children, talk with the elderly, build homes for those in need of solid shelter, offer ourselves as nurses or doctors to those ailing but without medical care. The experience of service can soon enough prompt a need for reflection, and so it is the documentary work can itself become a kind of service. The narrative work done among those vulnerable others can enable us to stop and reflect upon who they are and what we are trying to accomplish. The call to documentary work is an aspect of the call of stories, of our wish to learn about one another through observation of one another. That way, we can consider how we are getting on with one another. Serving each other with documentary work is the reflective side of such service. Those stories and pictures a chance for us to wonder how we are doing as we try to affirm ourselves by reaching towards others, helping to make a difference in a neighborhood, a nation.